And here's some more wild fun in Crimea, as always. The Crimean bridge was closed for the entire night. In Sevastopol, there were massive explosions near the Saki and Belbek airfields. By the way, things are absolutely insane in Crimea right now. The thing is, the few remaining fans of the Russian world who are still on the temporarily occupied peninsula, there aren't many of them, of course. Even they are in shock, because these Russian liberators are creating absolute horror and chaos on the peninsula, just like they did in Donbass.
Did we really vote for Russia? Just so that Russia would leave us without any means to survive? Why is the administration setting up our Russia with its actions, making people upset now? Ukraine gave us jobs, but under Russia we've been left without work. The actions they're taking, they're discrediting Russia itself. That's the issue. So it turns out 300 people are left in their old age, some in their old age. Well, just look, there aren't any 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds here. Everyone is between 40 and 60 years old. Where are we supposed to go? Who will hire us at this age?
But you know, I want to say that Crimeans still have little to complain about. Just look at what's happening in Russia itself, the most spiritual Russia.
This is a lesson in an ordinary school in Murmansk. There's no electricity, and the children are forced to study by flashlight.
We did not receive any of them.
We're studying by the soft, dim light of a candle.
Do you think people are sitting without power and water in the harsh Russian winter because of Ukrainian armed forces drones? No, all this is happening because their president is Putin. It's that simple.
People found themselves on the brink of survival because 5 power line pylons collapsed 7 kilometers from Murmansk. A major accident happened due to improper maintenance.
To put it simply, Putin couldn't care less about what happens in the Russian hinterland. For him, the main thing is to liberate Ukraine from some imaginary Nazis, right?
This state of utilities management has been around since Soviet times. Wear and tear is at 60, 70, even 80%. In big cities, it's a bit less because money is allocated and invested there. Moscow is a separate region. It gets more funding.
Well, of course, more funds go to Moscow. After all, that's where the Kremlin is, that's where Putin sits, and you just sit there in your Murmansk and keep quiet. That's exactly the logic in the Kremlin.
But this is far from an isolated incident. For example, in December, there were already several accidents on the heating networks in the Altai region. During repairs, more than 500 apartment buildings were left without heating. The main cause of the emergency is the severe wear and tear of the heating networks. During these days, the air temperature dropped to minus 28 degrees.
By the way, the funny thing is that even in Putin's hometown, St. Petersburg, there's a collapse too.
In St. Petersburg, electricity went out at night in the Krasnogvardeyski district, and in the Krasnoselsky district, more than 20 buildings were left without heating due to an accident on a worn-out heating network. Some residents also lost hot water while it was below freezing outside.
But the most important part is coming up right now. Russians who are watching me, listen to this and draw your own conclusions about whom you chose as president.
To avoid such accidents in the housing and utilities sector, about 10 trillion rubles need to be invested in Russian infrastructure. That is exactly how much the Kremlin spent on financing the war in Ukraine in 2025.
Yeah, Putin's Russia is a real Mordor, and the worst for the swamps of civilization is only just beginning. That's all for today. Subscribe to the Nazi Bit Ukraine YouTube channel. Take care.
Modern Russia is the dream of a schizophrenic and a Nazi. Putin managed to build what Hitler couldn't. Not because Putin is smarter, but simply because he has a nuclear bomb, while Adolf never managed to get his hands on such a coveted ticket to the UN Security Council and the right to do whatever he wants. Now Putin has even pushed the Austrian painter off the pedestal as the planet Earth's main villain. Under his leadership, Russia has confidently taken the place of the Third Reich and the status of the largest Nazi power in human history.
It is a deeply regrettable and tragic situation that Ukraine was used as a mere tool to fight against our country, which has taken on the declaration of different values. Because we are defending not only our own nation, but also the fundamental and essential values that form the very core foundation upon which human existence is built. These are the values that make a person truly human. Now I want to continue because it is a rare opportunity. It has become increasingly evident through recent events, quite remarkably, that it is actually the West waging a direct war against Russia. And Russia is defending the fundamental values that make a person truly human, while subjecting innocent civilians to cold and darkness. The Ukrainian people, when they ruthlessly target and kill those who couldn't be killed by Adolf Hitler's regime during the Holocaust.
Moscow is systematically promoting the ideology of Nazism, using the methods of the Nazis and drawing historical parallels. Here, one cannot avoid the theory of Russian exceptionalism, their special path, and the struggle for living space. For the Russians. For those who don't know, these are the official goals of the Russian world.
And its fate, secondly, in terms of the post-Soviet space now, in the post-Soviet space. In my opinion, it is extremely important to seriously reconsider our entire policy. Nevertheless, I continue to insist that our policy regarding the post-Soviet space, let's say, was not as effective as it should have been. In fact, we've overly indulged them. They really need to know their place. I'm deeply convinced of this.
The aggressive, expansionist policy being carried out under the slogans of Nazi Germany is now very easy. It's easy to confuse Hitler's speech before the attack on Poland with Putin's speech before the invasion of Ukraine. Both dictators shouted that they were going to protect the oppressed German and Russian populations, who were forbidden to speak their native language. And, as always, the Anglo-Saxons are to blame for everything.
As always, I tried to achieve change by peaceful and diplomatic means. We persistently and patiently tried to negotiate with the principal member states of the NATO alliance. It is a complete and utter falsehood when people say that we want to achieve change solely by force. We are not going to impose anything on anyone by force. These regions owe their cultural development exclusively to the great and historic German nation. Gdansk was torn away from us. The German minorities living there are subjected to the most vile persecutions. The goal is to protect people who have been subjected to abuse for 8 years, to genocide by the Kiev regime.
Before attacking the USSR, Hitler said he was forced to attack in self-defense because the Soviet Union itself was planning an aggressive assault. Doesn't that sound familiar?
We do not believe that we should be held responsible for the deaths of these people. Because we did not start this conflict. This war was started following the violent coup d'etat in Ukraine.
All these parallels can be drawn endlessly, and it would take dozens of hours of airtime. Putin's Russia, almost as if copying, repeats the actions of the German Nazis. It passes similar laws, creates analogous organizations, and conducts propaganda of hatred towards other peoples. It officially asserts its superiority over other nations and its right to rule over them.
They don't care about established international laws or the global international order. If, for our own vital national security interests, it was deemed necessary to start the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on that same reasoning, can't we start such operations in various other strategic locations within our sphere of influence?
Modern Russia is equivalent to Nazi Germany. The only difference is that the Hitler regime arose in the early 20th century in a German society traumatized by World War I. But Rashism arose from the absurd resentment of Russians toward their neighbors, who dared in 1991 to live independently from Moscow and its fanatical values. In both cases, the regimes are built on revanchism. But there's a nuance. Russians are taking revenge on everyone for the fact that they once became free. It's madness. And now, when they've been herded back into the yoke and are being driven by the hundreds of thousands into meat grinder assaults, they revel in it and adore their radiant leader.
The most concealed fact is that the Russian Empire was once said to have allegedly owned all the land on our planet Earth. Now, as for the history of Kazakhstan, on some stone somewhere, it's written that this is the history of Kazakhstan. The Vatican wrote the history of Kazakhstan, when in fact there was no such thing as the history of Kazakhstan, and there couldn't be, just like the history of Ukraine. And
so it turns out this guy probably sees you in such circumstances, always wanting to fight somewhere. He probably looks at Russians and thinks, oh, these people want to fight. Where should I send them? You don't even understand what you're doing in Ukraine. He sees you, basically as free cannon fodder. Do you really think Ukraine is the last war where you'll have to go and defend something? Of course not.
Once, Putin said that he keeps a volume of Lermontov on his nightstand. But under his pillow, he definitely has Mein Kampf.
Moreover, he has a deep passion for history and enjoys meticulously studying archival documents. And before making any significant and life-altering decisions, you see, he tries to understand the origins of this or that phenomenon, every single matter concerning Ukraine. After all, has necessitated the most comprehensive and detailed examination of issues connected to the origins and historical roots of the current Ukrainian crisis.
We are the villains.
There is a very striking example that proves Putin is obsessed with Hitler. The whole story with the occupation and annexation of Crimea is copied from the German Nazis, both ideologically and technically. Remember all that nonsense about primordial Russian lands, historical justice, and sacred holiness? All of this wasn't invented by Putin, but by Hitler. Back in the 1940s, the Führer declared Crimea, believe it or not, to be an originally German territory where Germans, or more precisely, the Germanic Gothic tribes, had lived since ancient times. And they really did live there, unlike the Russians.
Really? Yeah. And
the Goths had already been practicing Christianity in Crimea, well before the time Prince Vladimir was baptized there.
Hey, you scruffy mangy mutt, oh, where do you think you are going?
The Nazis planned to build a true German world in Crimea. The new region was called Gotenland and included the peninsula, Crimea, and the southern lands, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. It's terrifying. This mirrors the territory in southern Ukraine occupied by Russia. Moreover, the Germans planned to build the Crimean Bridge and a highway that would connect Germany to Crimea. Moscow made all of this a reality. Along with the Kerch Bridge, they built the Tavrida Highway.
Coincidence? I don't think so.
And the peninsula itself was planned to be pompously renamed Gotenland, meaning the land of the Goths. The main cities of Crimea were also supposed to receive Gothic names. For example, the Nazis renamed Sevastopol to Theoderichshafen, Theodoric's Harbor, in honor of the ancient Gothic king. Theodosia was to become Alaricshafen, in honor of another Gothic leader, Alaric, the very one, by the way, who once took Rome. Simferopol was simply to be called Gothenburg, that is, the Gothic fortress.
Well, what is this? They've completely lost their minds, you know?
According to Hitler's plan, all the local population was to be deported or eliminated from Crimea and replaced with Germans. This is exactly what Russia is doing on the peninsula right now. Instead of thousands of Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar refugees, hundreds of thousands of Russians have been brought in. What is happening there is literally an ethno-cultural genocide. Ukrainian schools have been eliminated, culture is banned, and the political activity of pro-Ukrainian forces has been destroyed. Putin has literally done what Hitler didn't have time to do in Crimea.
As for Gotland itself, the Führer planned to settle it with Tyroleans, a special sub-ethnic group of his fellow Austrians. Those very guys in hats with feathers, wearing short pants, singing yodels to the accordion from the Alpine peaks.
I really don't want to have to move away from Crimea or Alushta. It's just so absolutely wonderful here.
You're used to it now?
I've gotten used to it. We lived here as if it were our own home. Everything is so warm and heartfelt. It feels like home.
Putin repeated Hitler's plan not only ideologically but also technically. The annexation of the peninsula was a carbon copy of the Anschluss of Austria. In 1938, Nazi troops occupied Austria. And again, you won't believe it, they held a referendum there on reunification with Germany. Austria returned to its native harbor. Because there are no such thing as Austrians. They're Germans.
And we don't mind vareniki either, or borscht, it's a pretty good dish. And silo, in general, is not a bad product either. But no one will ever be Ukrainian, because being Ukrainian is a myth. There is no such people. Ukrainians are Russians who got distracted from their Russianness and started calling themselves Ukrainians.
Russia, rightfully, can and should be called the Fourth Reich. Moscow not only copies, but continues the policy of Hitlerism. The entire mythology and philosophy of modern Russia is built on the law of the strong and superiority over others. Even hosting the Olympics and Putin's publications in the times before the invasion of Ukraine no longer seem like a funny coincidence. Now there are absolutely no remaining questions left. Why do far-right German political organizations and movements continue to support Russia? Why is Putin's favorite writer the ideologue of Russian fascism, Ilyin, and his favorite philosopher a chauvinist, obscurantist, and outright Nazi, Dugin?
Our goal is to become in this tripolar world the most important center of power. That is why it is unacceptable to agree to the existence of a sovereign Armenia, or a sovereign Georgia, or a sovereign Azerbaijan, a sovereign Kazakhstan, a sovereign Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or Kyrgyzstan. Nothing sovereign can exist in this new model.
Nazism and hatred are growing in Russian society at a geometric rate. For years, propaganda has taught hatred and cruelty. It convinced people that Russians could do anything and that they had the right to take what they wanted by force. But this bucket of filth they plan to pour over Ukraine has splashed all over Russia itself. And now the whole pseudo-country is choking on internal inter-ethnic conflict.
This is the standard mindset of a Russian serf. We built everything for you. Before that, you lived in yurts.
I have one statement and one question about that. The statement: when we lived in yurts, you lived in dugouts? The question: the word Kirpish, brick, is a Turkic word. Could you tell me why?
What exactly led to this intense discussion about how Russia will tear everyone apart? Who was it that made it so that there are now constant talks about people from the Caucasus and Central Asia, or even, I don't know, Jewish people being suspicious in themselves and inherently dangerous? Not to mention Ukrainians, of course. Who did this? The great Russian people and everyone else, at best, are little brothers. Who did this?
Russian Nazis hate everyone equally. Ukrainians, Kazakhs, Buryats, Tatars, and Tajiks alike. That's their essence and their ideology. The meaning of the Russian world. You either acknowledge yourself as Russian, or we will destroy you.
Let them die then. We should stock up on popcorn and quietly watch. SDD says, eat each other up. But I want to agree with Igor Olegovich. We must not forgive, even though I am also a Christian, under no circumstances. And if we're going to practice with the Oreshnik missile without a warhead, just a kinetic strike, let's do it on the Baltics, because we don't feel sorry for them.
The peoples of Russia must understand and accept that it is impossible to negotiate with an animal infected with rabies. It must be resisted. And together. It's easier to do this together. In the Russian world, non-Russians will always be second-class people.
The country's not ready to even understand what it has done. You can't even imagine the extent to which the population is cut off from information. When people finally open their eyes, it will be worse than a nuclear strike on a populated island. They will simply fall into deep depressions. To realize what they were actually doing in Ukraine at that time and what was being done in their name. To imagine the scale of internal repression, to imagine the number of people wrongly convicted, detained every day. For nothing at all. No normal mind can comprehend this.
I want to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. We do not aim to mislead anyone. We are simply putting the emphasis on humor. I would kindly ask you to please take this with a smile.